My first question to you is, of course, we know that you are well vested in different areas of life when it comes to writing. But we are just going to be focusing on one of the books that you wrote on democracy, beyond democracy, that is. So my first basic question really is, what inspired you to write this book?
What inspired me the most when I wrote this book, it was about 20 years ago when I started doing that, was that I discovered that democracy at that time was not what people thought that it was. I discovered that democracy can be very oppressive, very dictatorial, very imperialistic, has caused a lot of suffering to the world, contrary to what we thought. And I still think that it is still, and after all these years of researching, democracy is not doing what it promises people to do. So, and then I come to realize that democracy is just an ideology, and there are some other political system which will emerge in the future. And I have been exploring that, and I discovered by myself that some new versions are going to come up, so democracy will not last.
What are these new versions that you say will be coming up?
I propose different versions of what I call post-democracy. And post-democracy is a new form of political system in the future. And just as in the older days, you have monarchy, you have dictatorship, you have totalitarian regime, and all of those also did not last for a long time. And democracy is no exception. The reason that we think that democracy is triumphant, especially at the end of the Cold War, you probably heard about the ideology about the end of ideas, the end of history, this kind of talk. Those are the propaganda after the end of the Cold War. Because at the end of the Cold War, the U.S. triumphed over the Soviet Union. And at that time, people was very euphoria about this kind of the emergence of capitalism and democracy were like the end of history. They stand for the ultimate triumph and achievement of human history, especially the Western, the American version. And I came to challenge that. And I said that democracy and capitalism in that case could not last in the future.
Now, when you talk about the post-democracy, have you seen it being practiced already in some of the countries, in some of the states? I know you say this is what you see in the future, but do you see some signs of it already playing out?
Yes, already. It is emerging, but slowly. I propose more than 5 or 6 different versions of the future. Remember, democracy, post-democracy, they are not monolithic. There are different versions of that. Post-democracy is no exception. There will be different versions fighting against each other, competing against each other. And there are some signs that they have been emerging now, but they are slowly. One good example is another book related to that. That's called Beyond the World of Titans and the Remaking of World Order, in which I predicted, and also another book, To the Future of Human Civilization. I already predicted more than 25 years ago of the emergence of China as the dominant superpower, and India will be the next. And what China and India soon, by the way, are doing is very interesting in that they are, one way or the other, establishing a new form of political system on earth, which I call one of the versions of the emerging post-democratic system, but they are not there yet. They are still in the process of evolving. What the Chinese political system is doing now is in the process of great transformation that people do not know. They keep talking about Chinese dictatorship. And all this is a Western ignorance about non-Western political system. And I'm challenging that we need to wake up, especially in the West, about some great transformation going on in economic, political, cultural, and other spheres. That's why I am the author of 153 books so far. I propose more than 120 different visions of the future. And 2 of these is what I just mentioned, post-democracy, post-capitalism. And the Chinese example is just an example to answer your question about the emerging forms of post-democracy. Another one, which you did not mention, which is very relevant, is women's rights. And I do think that in the book, I also say that women will make a major contribution to the emergence of post-democracy, because what women are doing nowadays is to question some of the democratic political system that we have, especially in the West, has established so far. And that is also another indication. And the third example is what I call Islam. Now, something is very interesting about the Islamic countries that the Western world has been ignoring so far and portray them as terrorists and all that. But what they are doing is very interesting. I have been in more than 100 different countries by now on the global tour. And I can see that many other things that they are doing is establishing a new form of political system. And that is emerging, but they are still in the process of evolving. They are not the final product yet, and they too will have a major contribution to the emergence of post-democracy. All of this, by the way, is contrary to what we think in the West.
You've mentioned that women will be making a major impact when it comes to post-democracy. What are some of the issues you have observed that women have raised that they are questioning to perhaps be part of this post-democracy?
Okay, I want to make a distinction between the feminist movement and post-democracy. What the feminist movement is doing is not about post-democracy. It's not about post-democracy, because the feminists are advocating in the last 100 years or more about equality. Nowadays in Scandinavia and in some other countries too, especially in the West, the top of 50-50 of everything. More or less a quota for women automatically just because you are half of the population. I'm saying that this is not sustainable. This is another form of reverse sexism, reverse oppression. So in the post-democratic environment, this is just a beginning to challenge the old traditional world that we get used to. But I think that this is not sustainable. What the post-democratic movement is going to do is to learn from the feminists in that sense, but go one step further to promote minority rights or women's rights in this sense, but in a way that become much more sustainable, in the sense of being focusing on merit, not on the basis I'm a woman, by the way, and if you do not give me a job or something, you are sexist. If you criticize me, then you are sexist. But I'm allowed to criticize you if you are a man. But if you criticize me, then you must be very sexist, patriarchal, and all that. So this kind of feminist ideology is too politically correct to the point that is backlashing. So this is exactly what's happening. And one of the reasons, I'm from the US, one of the reasons that Trump is popular among men, by the way, in the US, especially among the white nationalists, is because he is saying something that men now want to hear, is that the women in this sense are pushing too much and asking too many preferential treatment from society. And I spoke in that book about post-democracy, about a new form of racism, what I call reverse racism, reverse sexism, reverse classism in democracy is another reason that democracy will not last as we know it. It creating a lot of backlash within itself, a lot of fundamental conflicts that democracy cannot resolve. So the feminists in a way have done some contribution, but it's also time to transcend that. In the book, I talk about trans-feminist democratic movement in the future, which is post-democratic. Trans-feminist to transcend that, but they use a feminist as a base. So yes, in that sense, the women will have some contribution too, but they will be transcended as well.
How ready would you say different states are around the world to embrace this post-democracy? There's too many things going on. That's why in the book I have written 2 volumes about 1,000 pages. And why does it take so much? If it is such a simple case, that I can just finish it in 1 page, right? In 2 pages. But it takes so many pages. And also I have written another book, The Future of Capitalism and Democracy, also about another 1,000 pages. Why does it take such a long time, or so lengthy to write up? Because they are so complicated. And one of the things that you just mentioned is something that I have
talked about before too, is because democracy is creating too many problems nowadays. Democracy is not what we thought that it is. Look at, for example, about this, because I'm the U.S., I like to talk about the U.S. Look at the U.S. intervention in so many countries nowadays. Everywhere, we are always advocating war. Every year, every few years, you will see the U.S. going to this country, bomb that country, interfere into the domestic affairs of another country, send some army in, and then support the opposition. And in the process, we have created so many problems in other countries. Look at Syria, look at Libya, for example, look at Iraq, Afghanistan, and on and on and on. I have been in so many countries around the world, and I see that time and again everywhere, there are tremendous resentment against this kind of democratic involvement. So, and so many refugees. Look at nowadays, we talk about Brexit in the UK. In Germany, you have the problem about the refugee. Where are they from? From Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Syria, now from Yemen, now from Libya and all that. They just flee the country because the country had been bombed like to hell and there's civil war. Who supported all this? A major intervention here are from the Western powers. So this is very important. Democracy has caused so much problems, has created in many ways so much suffering in the world because of this.
But on that,
there's a backlash, by the way, and that's why Brexit is one good example. People just want to avoid all these immigrants coming to the UK. And the Germany too, now you have the rise of the far right, not just in Germany, but also in Poland, for example, in Hungary, in France too, in Italy, everywhere. Now you see it is a backlash of all that.
Yeah. On the point of the U.S. involvement, without dwelling so much on it, U.S. involvement or invasion into other countries under the pretext, so to say, of democracy. Is that really democracy in the real sense? And isn't it imposing their so-called democracy onto other countries by invading them? And
this is exactly one of the premises that I challenge the conventional wisdom about democracy, that democracy is good, non-democracy is bad. And just like there are some of the cliches saying that, let's say, among the feminists, men are bad, women are good. Whatever problem that you have, you just blame on the man. Man is always the problem which causing you all this problem. If you have a problem, just say it's sexist, it's patriarchal. And you just blame everything on men. The same thing in America, we also have blacks and white. Blacks like to blame white for all the problems that they have. Everything is always about racism. Now, the same thing about democracy. The problem with democracy is that every time when democracy does something, they always say they are doing the good thing. And other people are doing the bad thing. But if you look at that more carefully, it's just the reverse in many cases. Democracy has caused so much suffering around the world. And in fact, many of the colonial powers, many of them were democratic right at the beginning. In America, we have slavery, but it was justified even by the Supreme Court, by the way. Think about it, it's the judges, the legal court, which justified slavery more than 100 years ago. Think about it, it's democracy. So democracy, you have different definitions of democracy. One of them is about the notion of equality, freedom, and fraternity. That's the French definition, for example. Another one is the is a political system by the people, for the people, and of the people. And it's just different versions of the same way of looking at things. But if you think about this, it's the people who will decide, right? Not the king, the queen, the dictator. But time and again in democracy, it is the people who support the politician to invade another country, to support their own problem at home. Look at slavery in America. Look at the Japanese-American concentration camps during the war. Look at the involvement in foreign affairs, and look at the way that we treat the native Indians, the Eskimos, and all that. It's not just foreign, also domestic. It's not just in the U.S. You look at France, you look at Germany, you look at Italy, you look at the UK and how they treat their own people, the minority. Look at the Scandinavian countries even. Now, the Scandinavian used to have the ideology, the propaganda, that they are wonderful, they are good for democracy and all that. If you go to Scandinavia, I was there in all of those Scandinavian countries. Look at how they treat those people who are blacks. Those are Muslims. Those are Arabics. Many of those people often do not find jobs. and they often get a dirty job that the white Scandinavians do not do. Now, and there's a joke in Scandinavia that they have too many taxi drivers. They have PhDs. Now, this is just a joke. That's not true. But the joke is that the reason that is such a joke is that many people from Africa, from the Middle East, from South Asia and all that, they go to Scandinavia hoping for a better job and better life, and they end up finding that they are not quite accepted. They do not accept it as the equal citizen as the white Scandinavians. And of the job that they get, you look at the bus station, you go to the airport, you go to the supermarket, you go to auto shop, you go to the ghettos. What are those people? Many of them are not white Scandinavians. All those are black, Arabic, Muslim, and all those South Asian and all that. And all those jobs, the dirty job, who do them? It's those people who are doing the dirty job. Now, who are the CEO, the managers, the president, the chancellor, and all the top positions? Many of them are white Scandinavians. Now you talk the Scandinavian democracy is the ideal for the rest of the world. Come on, think about it.
Post-democracy, you've given the definition of democracy as we already know it. The definition of post-democracy.
The definition of post-democracy is to transcend the understanding of freedom and equality, to understand the trade-off between equality and freedom, to understand the dialectics between freedom and unfreedom. In fact, there are 7 tenets of post-democracy. One of them is that the notion that the trade-off between equality and freedom. The second tenet is about there's no freedom without unfreedom. And the third tenet is about there's no equality without inequality, which means that for any freedom that you create unfreedom at the same time. For any equality that you create inequality at the same time, which means that you become much more aware, much more enlightened about the fundamental conflicts and contradiction of equality and freedom that democracy does not address. And that is, we are going one step further now in the history of mankind, and later on another theory, the history of post-humanity. There is another theory of mine. Remember, I'm the author of 120 different visions and theories. One of them is called post-democracy. Another one is called post-capitalism. And the third is what I call post-humanity, that the human race, as we know it, will not last. It will be replaced by different beings in the future, and they will transcend the kind of values and beliefs that we believe in now, including democracy in this sense.
Dr. Peter, there is so much, just listening to you, I just want to go on and on with this interview. But in conclusion, what would you advise? What is your advice, to people, to the different countries, different states, when it comes to democracy, as well as, their embracing of post-democracy? What, in conclusion, would you say?
I don't need to give them the advice, because the situation, let's say the cultural, the social, the natural, and the mental factors which are evolved in the evolution of post-democracy are already there. With me or without me, the history will move on. The conflicts, the forces will fight each other out, with me or without me. Even if I were to die tomorrow, it does not change the picture. These forces will move on. They will evolve. They will fight out. And even for those countries and people that are fighting for democracy, they will learn too, sooner or later, about some of these problems, which they will have too, just as the Western advanced countries have faced already. Look at the mess in Brexit in the UK. And these political parties have been fighting with each other for so many months, cannot come to a single agreement. Each party is pursuing its own interest, and none of them care really about the national interest, but they talk like they care about the national interest. Each of them is pursuing itself with the ideology, for example, that competition in that case is good for the common good. There's another ideology about democracy, which is not realistic. And we had to question that kind of notion of freedom. So this is a question now also about freedom. It's also a question about equality too. So now another indication that many of the things which have been glorified, because we live in the age of democracy, just like 200 or 300 or 500 years ago, people live in the age of monarchy or despotism and all that. People will believe in that. Just like in the older days, people believe in the medieval Europe. They believe in God. Whatever they do is always in the name of God. For some now they still do it, but much less. So we're living in that age. And because of that, many of us in that sense are trapped into this kind of thinking. And many of my ideas, a vision is to ask people to think outside the box, to change what you believe, and to see that many of the things that we are believing in will not last for a long time. That is history, unfortunately, but history will always move on and change. And by the way, I also said in my book, even post-democracy will not last forever either. It will evolve itself into different forms over time.
On a lighter note, what is your main reason for being in Namibia?
My main reason is to discover humanity on the ground. I have been in more than 100 different countries now, not just 1, 2, or 3, and 4, in all continents. The reason for me is that I want to understand humanity not just by reading a book, which I could do very easily in a library, but I just want to go to each of them, live with the local people, and understand life, and see maybe I can be enlightened too in the process by different cultures. And that is a blessing to me, because I have discovered so much about the world in a way that the media had not spoken much about in each country. So to get out of the box is something that you can do like that. And that's one of the ways to open your box, to open your mind, and to see humanity in a different light. And that is something that I have done. I'm just very blessed that I have done that. And in Namibia is one of my spots.
What have you so far been able to identify in Namibia when it comes to humanity?
I have been here only for a few days so far, but I can see, because I have been in Africa for a few years now. I have been in more than 20 different African countries already, in North Africa, Western Africa, Eastern Africa, Central Africa, and Southern Africa, which means that I have been in all of them. And I can see that something is very interesting about the notion of Black or Africans, because I also understand that there are certain Black rationality, African way of life, which is very different from the Western ones. And in that sense, many of the stereotypes and the discourse on Africa turns out to be very, very false and ideological. And there's other dimension about way of life which the Western world has been dismissing. But I think that is just the opposite of the West, that the West doesn't want to see in itself. What is happening in Africa in many ways is something that the West does not have. And what is happening in Europe in a way is something that Africa does not have. So each of them can be complementary in a certain way, but each of them is also a reflection of this uniqueness that each of them try to dismiss as something not desirable in its own area. So if you grew up in the West, as I have, and you will come to learn that the Western discourse, the Western understanding of life and culture is the ultimate, is something that everyone else should copy. If you go to Africa, you must have the same understanding, but in a different direction, but that also a reflection of the African way of life. So, but this cannot be totally complementary to each other. In many ways, they are conflicting, but they are the human diversity that we need to accept.
Doctor, let me thank you so much for your vast knowledge and the time you've made to conduct this interview. We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for your invitation.